Sever Sacred Light is the sophomore full-length album from Petrification, a Portland, Oregon-based death metal band, and most would have said a death doom metal band. They're kind of a slower to mid-paced band. They started from musicians who were involved in thrash and crust punk influenced death metal bands and that kind of thing. And naturally, the style that they took on early on had something to do with Autopsy. It had something to do with Bolt Thrower, and you could kind of split the difference between those things from an album like Cenotaph, or Cenotaph's debut in 1992, the band from Mexico, where there was a little bit of Finnish death metal in there. There was a bit of incantations, pacing early on with albums like Onwards to Golgotha. It was an interesting band. It wasn't as good as the old greats, but it was a band that seemed uh, earnestly interested in an old school sound and had some interesting enough taste in combining them in interesting ways. There were a lot of bands doing that back in 2018, and they fit in pretty well, I would say, with maybe a gnarlier sound, maybe a little bit more in incantation than a lot of their peers in there, and I was pretty interested in what they would do next. But of course, it's been about 6 years at this point, so what are they doing now, and how different is it? So Petrification are back in 2014, and they're on Svart Records. A very reputable, just a brilliant label that's been around forever. And they've got this new record with the great art style from the vocalist on here. Everything's really impressive, and I think I was expecting something a little bit more of a breakthrough. And in that sense, this is maybe a very conservative death metal album that does a lot. What I mean is that it's not over the top in any one particular way. There are some exaggerated psychedelic feeling moments on it. There's a little bit more Autopsy than expected. There's certainly a lot of Bolt Thrower on this record and a lot of mid-paced songs, but they've dialed back the more extreme death doom feeling pieces to mid-pace. And what that does is it creates an album that is very samey in its pacing and movement. A lot of the riffs and cadence to the vocals are very repetitive, and overall, a lot of the album just kind of sounds like the same song one after another. And they've certainly pulled back on Death Doom, but it still has that element of doom to it. So if you're a fan of maybe early Convulse and just liked the first record from this band, it's not going to be a far leap. You're still going to feel some of those Finnish death metal influences. And I would say there are a couple of songs on here that do successfully kind of go for a demigod-esque sound, but I don't think that they're quite as sophisticated in the stages of melodic presentation and how that can evolve in an arc rather than a kind of a blunt reveal. But they still pull off a couple of pretty cool songs on here that I think are worth paying attention to, like Oniric Obscurum and some others. Uh, but I think I really wanted to like this album a lot more than I did, and it didn't really stand out to me. And I don't know if that's me being jaded after so many albums in this style for the last 5 years, or if it's this one just doesn't do a lot to stand out. And I think the presentation is so cool, and there's a great production value happening here. It does feel genuinely kind of aimed at the old school sound, and uh, it's just the songwriting doesn't explode out of the speakers, and there isn't a lot of speed or energy that brings me into the album and tells me to focus on it. And they also don't get all that weird with it either. And I kind of had that problem with a couple of records last year where you could tell there's quite a lot of Bolt Thrower in there, but they're not really doing anything as big as Bolt Thrower, other than throwing in maybe a nice melodic lead or something that frames a riff or a verses in a song. Nothing too extravagant or dramatic otherwise. So for me, I really appreciate that they have kind of stuck within their realm and elaborated on their sound in a way that is effective. But I didn't find this to be much more than average. I think, again, the audiovisual aspect of it is very strong, and that's a good selling point for this record. But these days, I think it matters more that there's something more lasting in the music, and maybe something more that it was just a little more exaggerated than what they'd done before, because this felt like a step back and a step into steady waters, where if they iterated upon this every year in this style, I might start to be interested in that. But this just feels like just an all right death metal record overall, to make the point bluntly as possible. And it releases tomorrow on February 9th, so you can see what you think and see how that works out for you when you sit with it. And you can preview a couple of songs on the site, as well as read my written review of it, which goes into much more detail as to what I liked about it and what I didn't. So go ahead and see what you think about it.